This is probably the most famous winter painting in the entire history of art. In it, we see a valley covered in snow, trees without leaves, and lakes completely frozen. But there is something about this painting that makes us wonder how it could possibly have been painted almost 500 years ago. The work is painted from an aerial perspective, something that may seem normal today, but in 1565, when this painting was created, it was something the world had never seen before. Pieter Brueghel was fascinated by elevated viewpoints, and he used them in many of his paintings. In this work, that perspective brings us directly to the edge of a slope, from where we look down at the small village below, accompanying the hunters who give the scene its title. If we look carefully, we realize that the composition is also very carefully constructed. The left side works as a foreground, where we see the hunters descending the hill, while the right side opens toward the valley, revealing a much wider landscape. The trees play a fundamental role in this dynamic. Their dark silhouettes stand out against the pale winter landscape, aligned in an almost perfect formation. They are spaced evenly, but gradually become smaller, creating a visual rhythm that slowly leads our eyes deeper into the painting. Hunters in the Snow is one of Brueghel's most accomplished works, but it is also one of his most enigmatic, full of clever details that reveal themselves little by little. Perhaps that is why the painting still feels surprisingly modern, even after almost 500 years. The painting shows 3 hunters returning home after their expedition. They walk slowly along the top of a hill, accompanied by their dogs, while looking down at the small village that stretches across the valley. Down there, life continues despite the winter. On the frozen lake, people skate on the ice and play an old sport called ice golf, a kind of early precursor to hockey. We will talk more about all of these scenes later, but first, I want you to look at a small detail on the left side of the painting. It is easy to overlook, but it is quite significant. It is the broken sign hanging above the entrance of an inn. Brueghel was a master of microscopic details. If you look closely, you will see that the sign depicts a male deer standing in front of a kneeling man with a halo. Historians have identified this figure as Saint Hubert. According to tradition, Hubert was a hunter who converted to Christianity after seeing a crucifix appear between the antlers of a deer he was about to shoot. A much later painting by Franz von Stuck clearly shows this scene. In it, we see a deer staring directly at Hubert, and between its antlers a glowing cross can be seen. Over time, Saint Hubert became the patron saint of hunters, which makes his presence in Brueghel's painting a very fitting reference. On the inn sign, there is also a text that reads, "Dit is Guden Hurt." It literally means, "This is the golden deer," or more likely that the name of the inn is the Golden Deer. But there is something curious. If the hunters expected to find rest there after their long day, the fact that the sign is broken suggests that something is not quite right. Below the sign, we see a family feeding a large fire that struggles against the winter wind. They are carrying bundles of wood, probably to roast some kind of animal, perhaps a boar, a pig, or a deer. However, there is a problem. The hunters have returned almost empty-handed. A pack of about 12 dogs, including greyhounds and hounds, accompanies the 3 hunters as they slowly descend through the snow. Everyone seems exhausted, and no one lifts their gaze. The hunters walk with their heads down, and even the dogs appear tired and discouraged. The men carry spears, which were typical weapons used for hunting large animals such as deer. But if we look closely, we realize that the result of the hunt is disappointing. The only thing they bring with them is a small fox, and it was not even a particularly valued catch. Foxes were not hunted for their meat, since many people considered it unpleasant, but rather for their fur, or to protect farm poultry from nearby predators. In other words, the expedition has returned almost empty-handed, and to make matters worse, Brueghel leaves another very subtle clue. Just in front of the hunters, in the snow, we can see a small trail of footprints. They were probably made by a hare or a rabbit the hunters had captured, but which managed to escape from them. But to fully understand this scene, we cannot underestimate what the failure of the hunt means. This painting was created between 1564 and 1565, during one of the harshest winters recorded in Europe. When we take this into account, many details in the painting begin to take on a much more unsettling tone. We have already seen the broken sign of the inn, which seems to hint at the poor result of the hunt, but it is not the only dark element in the scene. Several crows perch on the bare trees, while a magpie crosses the frozen sky of the painting. In the culture of the Low Countries, magpies were often associated with the devil, so their presence was not exactly a comforting sign. The row of trees, together with the flight of the bird, cleverly guides our gaze toward the village that appears in the valley. Down there we can distinguish around 60 figures. Some skate on the frozen lake, while others seem to be gathering wood and fuel, preparing for the even harsher weather that may still be coming. But not everything in the painting is threatening. While the hunters return defeated by their failure, most of the villagers seem completely absorbed in winter sports. This reveals a clear polarity between the two worlds. On one side, the tired hunters returning almost empty-handed. On the other, the lively activity taking place on the frozen ponds in the valley. On the greenish-grey ice, we see a scene full of movement and energy. There are skaters gliding across the frozen surface, fishermen who have opened holes in the ice, players of curling, and also games of ice golf, a primitive form of ice hockey that was practiced in the Low Countries during the Middle Ages. All of this activity conveys a feeling of vitality and joy, and it is precisely this contrast that makes the painting so fascinating. After the Protestant Reformation, many artists in Northern Europe began to move away from traditional religious themes. Instead, they became increasingly interested in scenes of everyday life with ordinary people, landscapes, and humble daily activities. Hunters in the Snow belongs precisely to this new type of painting. The work is believed to have been part of a series of 6 paintings dedicated to the seasons of the year. The series was commissioned by a banker from Antwerp named Nicolaas Jongelink and followed an old medieval tradition known as the Labours of the Months, which depicted the tasks and activities typical of each time of the year. But there is another interesting detail, and that is that the scene we see in the painting probably never existed in real life. Brueghel combined typical Flemish buildings with steep mountains that clearly resemble the Alps, which means the landscape is an imagined construction. By adopting this elevated perspective, almost as if we were observing the world from the air, Brueghel created a new way of looking at reality. At a time when cartographers were beginning to map nearby and distant territories, Brueghel was also mapping the world, but with the eye of an artist. His paintings still feel surprisingly modern because they organize space as a multiplicity of small human stories and experiences, a way of seeing the world that, quite remarkably, still feels modern even 5 centuries later. Thank you for watching the video until the end. I would love to know if this is the first time you have seen this painting, or if you were already familiar with it. And of course, if you would like to add anything that I did not mention during the video, feel free to leave it in the comments. If you would like to collect this artwork and have it in your home, you can purchase it through the link in the description. There you will find more than 800 carefully selected artworks, so you can begin your own art collection and turn your home into your own personal museum. Shipping is free worldwide, and by purchasing, you will be supporting me greatly in continuing to create videos like this. Thank you for your support, and I will see you in the next video.